Good morning, and thank you for sharing your Monday morning with us today to talk about digital accessibility as it relates to tables and charts, somewhat specifically in Excel, more generally to tables. If tables need to be structured properly in order for a screen reader and for keyboard access for people who can't use a mouse to be able to navigate such a table. And our tables are data rich, information rich. So it's really important that our students and our colleagues are able to access them. Today we are using the Q&A. So if you have questions, please click on the Q&A, put your questions in there. If you don't see the Q&A, click the More button and you'll see it. For those of you who prefer to read along while we are speaking, you can also go to the More button and you will see CC for closed caption, and that will give you the captions at the bottom of your screen. With us today, we have behind the screen Nitesh. He'll be running the slide deck for us, and doing our session for us is Surbi. Surbi, I'm turning this over to you.
Thanks, Sherry. Hello, everyone, and a very good morning to you all. So, spreadsheets or like Excel are something that most of us use all the time, whether it's for managing data, creating reports, or sharing information. So, today we are going to look at Excel from a slightly different perspective, that is, through the lens of accessibility. And the good news here is making Excel files accessible is not complicated at all. With just a few small, thoughtful changes, we can actually make a big difference and ensure that everyone is able to access and understand the content. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Next slide, please. A very quick reintroduction for the newcomers. I'm Surbi Loya, and I have been working in digital accessibility for over a decade, focusing on inclusive design, audits, and training. Now, with that short introduction, let's move ahead and let's check what we have stored in for today. Next slide, please. Before we jump in, let us take a quick look at what we are going to cover today. So just to set up the stage, basically. So by the end of this session, you will have a clear understanding of how to apply accessibility in your everyday work, especially with spreadsheets. So we'll start with why accessibility matters in spreadsheet or Excel, because once that clicks, actually everything else starts to make sense. And then we'll talk about how to plan accessible spreadsheets. And honestly, this step will save you a lot of rework later. From there, we will get into practical Excel best practices, the kind of things that you can start using immediately after this session. We'll also look at charts and visuals because data is not just numbers in rows and columns, and those definitely needs to be accessible as well. We'll also look at some built-in tools and accessibility checkers that can help you catch issues quickly, but also where you need human judgment. Since many of you may also use Google tools, we'll touch quickly upon Google Sheet accessibility tip as well. And because spreadsheets are often shared beyond Excel, we'll cover how to export accessible PDF from these spreadsheets that you have created accessible. And finally, we'll explore how artificial intelligence can actually support accessibility without replacing your role in the process. Last but not the least, we will look at some quick checklist resources along with a short demo and Q&A at the end. So you can think of this session as a mix of why it matters, how to do it, and tools that can make your life easier. So let us get started. Next slide, please. Now, let us talk about why spreadsheet accessibility really matters so much. Imagine this for a moment. You've created a spreadsheet. Everything looks perfect, well organized in your screen. The colors make sense, the layout feels clean, and you share it with your students, colleagues, or anyone in the university. But then someone using a screen reader opens that same file, and suddenly the structure is not clear at all. The relationships between the data are not obvious, and navigating through it becomes very frustrating and confusing. That is where accessibility comes into picture. So, accessibility is about making sure that everyone, regardless of how they access the file, can understand and use the data effectively. An accessible spreadsheet does not just look good visually, it purely communicates the structure and relationship between the data. Now, allows users to navigate efficiently, whether they are using a keyboard instead of a mouse or relying on a screen reader. It also ensures that charts and complex information are meaningful rather than overwhelming or unclear. And this becomes even more important when files are shared outside of Excel, especially as PDF documents or any other format. There's definitely a compliance aspect to it as well to consider with legal frameworks like the Americans with Disabilities Act, DOJ, etc. But beyond compliance, this is really about inclusion. It is about making sure that every learner and every colleague has equal access to information that you create. So when we talk about accessibility, we are not just talking about fixing files, we are actually talking about removing barriers here. Next slide, please. Now, if you remember just one thing from today's session, let it be this. If you create it, you are responsible for making it accessible. Now, it sounds very simple, but it is actually a shift in the mindset. A lot of times we assume that accessibility is something that will be handled later, maybe by a tool or by another team or during review. But in reality, accessibility starts with the person creating the document. So whether you are building a faculty worksheet, preparing an administrative report, creating a student-facing spreadsheet, or sharing just the data publicly, the responsibility stays within you. So every decision you make, the way you structure your data, the way you label columns, the way you format your content, all of that directly impacts whether someone else can actually use that file or not. Again, the good news here is when you build accessibility in your Excel or spreadsheet from the beginning, it does not feel like additional work at all. It just becomes part of how you design your work on a daily basis. So think of accessibility not as an add-on, but as something that starts with you right from the first cell that you create in an Excel. Next slide, please. Now, even before you open a spreadsheet or Excel and start typing your data, this is where accessibility really begins. That is planning. I know it is tempting to just jump straight into building the spreadsheet, but taking a minute to think ahead can actually save you a lot of time later. Also, it would help you avoid those fixes later. So before you create anything, pause and ask yourself a few simple questions. Who is going to use this data? Is it just you, or it will be students, colleagues, or the public will be interacting with it? Will this file be exported to a PDF at some point? Because if it is, the way you structure, the way you save your document will directly affect how the accessibility of that document is. And here is an important question. Will someone need to navigate this without relying on visual cues? For example, without colors, without layout hints, or even without seeing the screen at all? So these questions will help you design with intention instead of just fixing issues later. Because The reality, most accessibility issues are not caused by complex features. They are actually there because of lack of planning. So when you take a moment to think about structure, users, and how the file will be used, you're already uh, making your spreadsheet and Excel files more accessible before you even type your first value. So what is the moral of the story? Accessible spreadsheets really begin with thoughtful planning. Next slide, please. Now, let us talk about something that makes a huge difference but is often overlooked. That is keeping your design simple. Now, when it comes to accessibility, simple is not basic. Simple is powerful. A clean and straightforward structure makes it much easier for everyone to understand and navigate your spreadsheet, especially for someone using assistive technology. So, a good rule to follow is one data set per worksheet. Try not to mix multiple unrelated tables or sections in the same sheet because that can quickly become very confusing and frustrating for people who rely on assistive technology. Also, avoid complex layouts, things like scattered tables, irregular spacing, or creating format which might look visually appealing, but they can break the logical flow of the data. Make sure to keep your rows and columns logical and consistent so that the information flows naturally from left to right and top to bottom. Use simple table structure, nothing overly complicated, just clear, organized data. At the end of the day, accessibility is not about making it look only fancy. It is about, along with making it visually appealing, it's about making things easy to understand. So whenever you're unsure, come back to this idea. Simple structure leads to a better access for everyone. Next slide, please. Now, let us look at some of the most common accessibility problems we see in spreadsheets. This is where things get interesting because many of these files actually look perfectly fine visually, but they create real barriers for users who rely on assistive technology and keyboard only. Let me walk through a few typical issues now. First is missing headers. So when a spreadsheet does not have a clear header row, a screen reader cannot tell what each column represents. So instead of hearing something meaningful like student name or a final grade, the user would just hear cell values with no context at all. Uh, that would be very difficult for them to understand how the data is related. Next, we have merge cells. These are often used to make titles or sections look neat, definitely, but they actually break the structure of the table. So screen reader depends on a consistent grid, and merge cells actually break that, making navigating very confusing and sometimes even inaccurate. Then we have these blank rows or columns, which visually might look like a simple spacing, but for a screen reader, they can signal that it is the end of the table. So the user might think that the data has ended here, even when there is more information below or to the sides. Another common issue is poor contrast. So we've discussed about this a lot many times. Light text on a light background or colors that are too similar can make text very difficult or impossible for someone to read, especially with low vision or people with color blindness. Next, we have images without alternative text. Now, text are also, if there is no alternative text, it is definitely a big problem. Some image which contains information, and if you don't provide any alternative text, people who do not see cannot get that information at all. Finally, we have these complex layout where the data is scattered all across the sheet or arranged in a non-linear way. So it becomes very hard to follow, especially without visual cues. So if you look at the example on the screen, you can see how all these or some of these issues I highlighted Each one may seem very small visually, but together they create a very difficult experience for someone using assistive technology or only keyboard. So the key takeaway here is what looks clear and organized to you visually might not be accessible to everyone. And once you start recognizing these patterns, you would start you would begin to spot and fix them much more easily than fixing it later. Next slide, please. Now that we have talked about common accessibility problems, let us look at a simple way to make your spreadsheets more accessible. One of the most effective tools in Excel is using tables. Now, tables are not just for formatting or making your data look nice. They actually give your spreadsheet a clear structure that assistive technology can identify. Now, here's how you can do it. First, you need to select the data that you want to include in a table. Then you need to go to the Insert menu and Insert Table. In the pop-up, you need to define the range of the data table available. And there is a checkbox that you would see which says my table has headers. And this is very important because it helps the Excel to identify with screen reader which row contains column headers. Once your data is in a table, screen readers can actually identify headers while navigating. This means that someone navigating the spreadsheet will always know what each column represents, making it much easier to understand the data. Navigation also becomes much smoother, so users can move through the table by column or rows without getting lost. And for you, it helps managing and analyzing data easier too. So think of tables like turning a raw scattered data into a structured accessible format, and it is one of the simplest and most powerful way to make your spreadsheet accessible from the very beginning. Tables do more than just organize data visually. They actually communicate the structure to everyone, ensuring spreadsheets work for all users. For example, even for a person without disability, once you assign the table headers, column headers, and etc., you can get options to perform so many functions in the same place, like you can filter, sort, etc. So definitely it's not just about accessibility. It makes the overall experience amazing for everyone. Next slide, please. Now, let us focus on headers, which are one of the most important element in an accessible spreadsheet. So headers actually act like a signpost. They guide users through your data and tell them what each column or row represents. Now, without clear headers, even a well-structured table can be very confusing. So what does a good header looks like? First, use only one header per row. Per table, like multiple headers and in rows can confuse screen readers and makes the table harder to navigate and even understand. Next, keep your header names clear and descriptive. So avoid vague terms or abbreviations which are not clear. For example, instead of just mentioning ID, you can mention student ID. That way, anyone who's reading the table knows exactly what the column contains. Headers should be very simple, concise, and consistent. So they are not the place to be creative with formatting or wording. So think of them like an instruction for anyone using the data. By creating clear headers, you ensure that every user, whether reading visually or using assistive technology, can understand the structure and meaning of your data immediately. So headers are the roadmap of your spreadsheet, and a good roadmap definitely makes the journey easy for everyone. Next slide, please. Now we come to a problem that is very common and it can cause major accessibility issue. That is merge cells. So merge cells are often used to make a title or a section look neat across multiple columns or rows. Now visually, it might look nice, but under the hood, it actually breaks the structure of your table. Why is this a problem? First, merge cells break header relationships. So screen readers rely on a consistent navigation to connect column headers to the data below. Now, when cells are merged, that connection is broken and the data becomes very confusing to navigate. Second, merge cells can again confuse screen readers as they can skip over data or read it in a wrong order, which can completely distort the meaning of the data. Third, merge cells can disrupt navigation. So users relying on the keyboard or assistive technology will find it difficult to move through the spreadsheet efficiently, which definitely would slow down or even block access to information. So what is a better option instead of merging cells if you want your title to stand out? So what you can do is you can use the option center across selection. So here is how you can do it. So once you've unmerged the cells, or let's say you have a title from A1 to I1, you need to select this range or the range wherever you want the text to appear. Then right click and choose Format Cells. Within that, go to the Alignment tab, and within the Alignment tab, you'll see an option called Horizontal Combo Box. Within that, you need to select Center Across Selection. You click OK, and the text that you have mentioned as a title will now appear in the center of the selected cells. So without merging the columns, the cells, you can actually create the same effect visually. So do remember, merged cells may look neat, but they actually break accessibility. So by using this alternative, that is center across selection, you keep your spreadsheet clean, readable, and fully accessible to everyone. So this meets the visual check that you would like it to be, as well as it is accessibility compliant. Next slide, please. Now, next, we have a very common issue that can cause a lot of accessibility problems, that is blank rows and columns. Now, blank spaces might look simple for a formatting or a way to make your spreadsheet look neat, but for users relying on assistive technology, they can be very confusing. Now, screen readers often interpret blank rows or columns as the end of a table. So if there is more data below or to the sides, the user might even never know that it exists. So navigation also becomes awkward because the entire spreadsheet, when you're navigating with the keyboard, the focus can jump unexpectedly across those blank spaces, and it can confuse a user how the data is organized. So the key role here is to maintain continuous data ranges, especially inside your table structure. Make sure that there are no unnecessary blank rows or columns, and every row or column or every cell should have a data or meaningful headers. Now, this keeps the table readable, navigable, and predictable for everyone. You might be wondering, what about spacing for title or section heading, especially if we are avoiding merge cells and adding center across selection, as we discussed earlier, we'll have those cells empty, right? So by doing this, other cells will technically be empty, but this is okay. Why? Because this is outside the main data table first. And also, when a screen reader user is navigating to this cell where the title is, it will read out that the title is from so-called from A1 to I1. So it will make sure the user knows that there is data there. So by this, it gives appropriate information to the user and does not confuse them at all. So the important distinction to remember is that blank cells inside a table is a big no, and if it is available outside the table range, maybe for a title row, uh, it is still acceptable when we are using these formatting options like center across selection, because that will visually look neat, and at the same time it will convey the information to the assistive technology users. So the takeaway here is quite simple. Uh-huh.
There's a question that applies right here. If somebody is
Mm-hmm.
creating a blank spreadsheet for other people to fill in their own data, it's
Uh-huh.
just going to have headers, column and row headers. The rest is going to be blank. Is that okay?
So it's always a good option to add a placeholder. Like when you see these date fields, they would give this placeholder what format you need to put, right? DDMMYYY. So same thing, you can add a placeholder, type your answer here, and maybe when the students are typing, they just need to remove that and they can start typing in that cell. So that would help them know where they need to start typing.
And the other question is for visual appeal without breaking for the screen reader,
Mhm.
can we change borders? So instead of having the empty row 6, could we have a border between 6 and 7? So that would give an eye a rest?
Yes, yes, you can do that as well. So suppose you need to, so this center across selection option that I discussed definitely works when we are selecting multiple columns in the same row. Like if we are selecting row 1, multiple columns, we are merging that. Instead of merge, we use this option. But suppose there are multiple rows which needs to be selected, like where you were using merge cells. For example, row A2 until A10. So definitely it's advisable to give a border to that so that visually it's easy for the users to understand. And for screen readers, they can navigate and it still keeps them connected how it is created.
Okay, and Excel will often format a negative number in red. Will the screen reader read it as a negative number?
Um, I need to get back to you on this, but if it is only highlighting that in red, I can check that if screen reader reads it or not, but I would still say it's a good
Okay.
idea to mark it as negative. Maybe you can add a text there or something like that.
And then this came up several times, the blank cell. If there's no data for the cell, like the student didn't take that particular exam, and there's no data for that cell.
Okay.
We don't want to put a 0 because they didn't get a 0. So
Right.
do we put text in like no data
Yes.
or
Yes, you can put anything appropriate, like it could be not applicable or it could be just a hyphen also. So screen reader would read that out, and when we are navigating with the shortcut keys, the table access will not break there. So it's always advisable to put some text there or a hyphen for uh, this assistive technologies to identify.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but that helped.
No problem. So yeah, so the takeaway with the blank cells columns is that avoid empty rows and columns inside a table. So always use a formatting tables to look for your titles to make it look neat without breaking accessibility. Now, this way, your spreadsheet definitely would be accessible. So, as we discussed, if there is any data, suppose it's a report card or for some students, and you don't have any marks for any particular subject for any student, make sure to mention some data there. Could be not applicable, hyphen, etc. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we've covered, I think merge cells, tables, headers, blank spaces. It's time to talk about organizing your entire workbook. Now, even if every table is accessible, navigating a workbook with multiple sheets can be confusing if it is not organized clearly. Now, think about it, how often you open some spreadsheet or I would say a workbook and wonder what each sheet contains just by looking at the sheet name like sheet 1, sheet 2, or sheet 3. It can definitely slow you down and create unnecessary frustration because you would have to go to each sheet and check what data you're looking for. So the first tip is to use descriptive sheet names instead of just generic name. Try to label your sheet with what actually the data it contains. Like it could be students, grade fall 2024, budget summary, quarter one, etc. This would help everyone immediately understand the content and purpose of each sheet. Next, delete any unused or unnecessary sheet. Now, extra sheet with no data or notes can be really confusing, especially for users with screen readers and other assistive technology, because they navigate through every sheet sequentially. So it can just be an add-on for them. Finally, if your workbook contains multiple data sets, try to separate them into different sheets and do not try to cram everything into one sheet, which makes it very harder to follow. And it can actually break accessibility when tables are interrupted with unnecessary data. So clear sheet organization improves navigation, saves time, and ensures that everyone can find and understand the data quickly. So think of each sheet as a separate chapter in a book. The clear the chapter titles and order is, the easier it is to read and follow. So when you take a moment to organize your sheets clearly, you're actually making the spreadsheet more accessible and usable, and I would say user-friendly for everyone. Next slide, please. Now, let us talk about formulas, which are the backbone of any spreadsheet, but can sometimes be very confusing even for experienced users. Now, the goal here is to make your formulas clear and understandable so that anyone using your spreadsheet can follow the calculations without guessing. Now, one way to do this is to use descriptive cells name instead of generic references like A1 or B2. So, for example, instead of a formula that says equals to A1 plus B2, you could name the cells as total sales and tax. So the formula reads equals total sales plus tax. So this way, it makes much easier to understand what the calculation is doing. Next, if you have a complex calculation, try to break it into smaller steps using intermediate cells instead of one big, long, complicated formula. Try to divide it into logical pieces. So this way, users would be able to see each step of the calculation and follow the logic more easily. Now, another best practice is by adding comments or notes, which could be a very helpful practice. You can explain important formulas, clarify assumptions, or note unusual values. This can provide context for anyone who's reviewing the spreadsheet later and even people with assistive technology. So the key idea here is clear formulas and helpful notes can definitely make your spreadsheet easier for everyone to understand, not just the person who created them. So accessibility is not just about data visibility, it is also about comprehension. So whenever you build formulas, think about how someone else would read them, make them descriptive, break them down, and add notes. This way, your spreadsheet will become a tool that is accessible and usable for everyone. Next slide, please. Now that we've covered structure and formula, let us talk about the actual content in your spreadsheet and how to make it accessible. Most of these practices may sound familiar to you because we have been discussing about these in our mostly all the sessions, but they are just as important as here in spreadsheets as anywhere else. So accessibility principles carry across all types of content. So it is worth reinforcing them here as well. One of the most important area is hyperlinks. Many times we just type something like click here or paste a long URL, which can be very confusing for someone using a screen reader because it gives no context at all. Instead, try to use descriptive hyperlinks that explains the destination. For example, instead of just saying click here, you could write download the 2024 budget report.pdf. This way, anyone who's navigating the file knows exactly what the link will do and where it leads to. Next, we have images and visuals. So always try to provide an alternative text for images. Now, alt text is a brief description that conveys the purpose of a purpose and the intent. Like it shows what the image has in a very short manner. Now, if the image does not convey any information and is purely decorative, you can definitely go ahead and mark it as decorative so that the screen reader users can skip it completely. This will ensure that visual information is not lost for people who cannot see the images. Another key point is color and contrast. So make sure the text and background colors have sufficient contrast, at least 4.5:1. So mostly people with low vision, it's very important for them to have this contrast. So make sure that there is enough contrast and you do not choose a light on light or a dark on dark text. Also, do not rely on color alone to convey any meaning. For example, if you highlight cells in red to indicate a problem, also add a text so that the people with assistive technology or people who do not see or also people who have color blindness can get the same information. So the main idea here is accessibility should support understanding, not replace it. And by using descriptive hyperlinks, alternative text, accessible colors, you're actually making the spreadsheet clear and usable. So it's not just for people who can see it visually, but also for someone who cannot see the colors or who do not see the images. Next slide, please. Now that we have covered content, let us talk about charts because data definitely is not always about rows and columns. And charts and visuals are very helpful for understanding information quickly, but it definitely needs to be accessible too. So the first thing to remember is to add a clear and descriptive chart title. A chart, the title should basically explain what the chart is showing, not just something generic like chart 1. It would definitely help everyone, not just people with assistive technology. Next, include data, labels, and legends. This is again very important because it explains the information in the chart, like what each color or line represents, and do not try to rely on color alone to convey any information. For example, if red represents expenses and blue represents revenue, also include the same labels and legends so that the meaning is very clear. It is also very important to include the supporting data table. Now, some users cannot access the visuals for charts. So having the underlying numbers in a table will ensure that everyone can access the same information that is shown visually. Another thing is alternative text, which is a very key element here. Try to add the alternative text for the chart that summarizes the key insight or the trend. For example, instead of saying chart of sales data, you can write something like line chart showing steady growth and sales from January to December. Now, this communicates the important information without relying on sight. So accessible charts focus on clarity and communicate the key message, not just the decoration. So by following these steps, you're making sure that your charts will be meaningful and understandable by everyone, no matter how they're accessing your spreadsheet. So charts are most useful when they are clear, labeled, and accompanied by data and description. By making the information fully accessible, you make sure that no student misses on any information. Next slide, please. Now, as we covered tables, headers, content, etc., let us talk about a very helpful tool which is built right into Excel, that is Accessibility Checker. Now, this tool can help you quickly identify potential accessibility issues in your spreadsheet. But it is very important to remember that it is just a starting point. You still need to review your spreadsheet manually to ensure everything is truly accessible. Now, how do we use this tool? You need to go to the Review tab and select Accessibility Checker. Click on Check Accessibility, and Excel starts scanning your sheet. And it will show you a list of issues, warnings, and tips. Then you will need to review each issue carefully. The checker will also give you guidance such as low contrast or object without alternative text, etc. Take the time to fix the errors, warnings that it identifies. Accessibility Checker is definitely very useful because it highlights the issues which you might not notice visually. So still, it cannot detect everything. For example, it would not identify whether your text labels are meaningful or not, or it would not identify whether your formulas are clear. So it's always a good practice to use a combination of checker and manual test, which gives you the best design approach for accessible spreadsheet. So think of Accessibility Checker as a helpful guide, not a replacement for careful planning. So use it to catch obvious issues, but always verify manually to make sure the spreadsheet is accessible. Next slide, please. Now, while most of our focus has been on Excel, many of you must be using Google Sheets as well. So it is very important to know how to make them accessible too. All the concept that we've discussed until now definitely applies to Google Sheet too, except the Accessibility Checker tool. So one of the best tool for Google Sheet is Grackle for accessibility. Now, it is an add-on that can scan your Google Sheet the same way that Accessibility Checker does in Excel and identifies accessibility issues. Now, here is how it...
Let me jump in here very quickly. So we have Grackle for all VCCS faculty and staff. You need to log into your browser using your @email.vccs.edu and then go to your extensions and Grackle will be there. Every time you use Grackle, you still have to launch. You will not need to install it. We've installed it for you, but you will need to launch. So the trick of it is to remember that your browser must be your @email.vccs.edu, not your personal sherry.prupis@gmail browser that you're using, and Grackle will be available. Thank you, Surabhi.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for pointing this out. So once the Grackle is installed in your system and ready to use, as Sherry mentioned, once you launch it, the tool will review your spreadsheet, a Google Sheet, and highlight accessibility errors. After the scan, you need to take time to review each error and follow step by step to fix the issues that it suggests. This will ensure that your spreadsheet is structured, labeled, and readable for everyone. Now, when sharing Google Sheets, also consider how you share them. use view-only mode when appropriate, or publish to the web in a way that preserves accessibility. So the key takeaway is that well-structured sheets make data easier to navigate and understand, just like in Excel. So using accessibility tools like Grackle would definitely help you catch issues earlier and make your Google Sheets much accessible in the beginning step itself. Now, even if the platform is different, the principles of accessibility, clear structure, descriptive labels, and thoughtful design apply just the same here as well. Next slide, please. Now, let us quickly talk about a very important step that many of us overlook, that is exporting spreadsheets as PDF files. Now, many spreadsheets are shared as PDF because you don't want it to be changed by anyone or to make it a readable, compatible mode. But simply printing or saving it as PDF will not automatically make the document accessible. Now, if you skip the correct process here, all the work that you did to make the spreadsheet accessible can be lost. So here is the process how you need to do that. Once you click on Save As within the File menu, you need to definitely type a file name. Once you've selected a destination, within the Save As type combo, you need to select the option PDF. And there, within the same pop-up, you would see an option button. If you click on it, you would see a checkbox which you need to enable that says Document Structure Tag for Accessibility. It's very important to check this checkbox and then go ahead and save it. This will ensure that your headings, tables, and your content is tagged properly so that the assistive technology can read them easily. After exporting it, it is very important to check the PDF. Now, if you have Acrobat Pro accessibility checker, you can definitely go ahead with that, or else any other authorized automation tool that can verify with the PDF reading. You can also have a quick check by using a screen reader like Narrator or NVDA in Windows or JAWS, as well as VoiceOver in Mac or Mac iOS. Now, by this, you can confirm whether the reading order, table structure, etc. are reading fine. So the key point here is accessible documents must remain accessible even after you export it to a different format. So it's not just about Excel or Google Sheet. The same principle apply when you're sharing your work in other formats. So make sure to always check and confirm before sharing the document. By following this process, you'll definitely make sure that the PDF, which are the converted spreadsheets, are accessible too. Next slide, please. Let us now talk about the new and exciting way to support accessibility, that is using artificial intelligence. Now, AI tools can assist with many accessibility tasks, like making it easier and faster to create accessible spreadsheet. But it is really important to remember that human review is still essential. So AI can be a support, not a replacement for careful planning. For example, it can help you generate alternative text for charts and images, which definitely you need to review it manually. It can suggest clear and descriptive sheet names. It can also check color contrast to ensure readability. And it can also explain complex formulas in simple, plain language. Now, some of the tools that you can use is Microsoft Copilot and Google Gemini, which are integrated with Microsoft Excel as well as Google Sheet, and it can help you apply these suggestions quickly. So the key takeaway here is AI can definitely save time and highlight potential issues, but the responsibility for accessibility still rests with you. So always review and confirm that the AI suggestions are accurate and meaningful for your audience. So by combining AI and support with a thoughtful design and best practices, you can definitely make the spreadsheet accessible for everyone. Next slide, please. Now that we have covered the best practices and tools, let us take a moment to summarize some of the most common accessibility mistakes in spreadsheets. Now, we've definitely discussed about all these points in our earlier slides, but seeing them together here as a quick reference will definitely help reinforce what to avoid. First, using sheet names like sheet 1 or sheet 2, which gives no context about the content. Always use descriptive names so that anyone opening the workbook knows what each sheet contains. Next, merge cells, which we discussed earlier, breaks table structure and confuses screen reader users. Blank rows and tables makes the navigation much difficult and can signal the end of the table incorrectly. Charts without alternative can lose their meaning for people who cannot see them. Relying on color alone to convey information can actually make it impossible for someone with low vision or color blindness to understand what the data says. Low contrast colors make it very hard to read, and vague hyperlinks like click here provides no guidance about the destination. So avoiding these common mistakes can improve accessibility dramatically, and each one may seem very small on its own, but together they make a huge difference in spreadsheet, and um, it can make some users really frustrated while they're navigating here. Next slide, please. Now that we reviewed the common mistake, let us quickly bring together all the accessibility checklist. Now, before you share your spreadsheet, it is a good idea to run through these items, I would say, to have a quick check. So first, use tables for structured data. So definitely tables provide clear headers, help with navigation, and makes it very easier for screen readers and keyboard users to understand the flow. Next, make sure your column headers are clear and descriptive. This will ensure that everyone knows what each column represents and it can avoid confusion. Do not use merge cells. Remember, merge cells break the structure of the table and can confuse people with assistive technology. Make sure to add alternative text to images and charts, which allows users to identify the content even if they don't see it. Check your colors and contrast and make sure that there is enough contrast between text and background, and do not rely on color alone to convey any meaning. Finally, run the accessibility built-in checkers to catch potential issues. But do remember, it is just a starting point, and it's very important to review your spreadsheet manually to confirm that it is accessible for everyone. So use this checklist as one of the powerful tool just before sharing your workbook with anyone ahead. Next slide, please. Now, before we wrap up our session today, it would be very helpful to know where you can go ahead and find more information and guidance on accessibility. So there are several excellent resources that provides detailed guidance, tutorials, and examples. So the first one is the World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative, also known as W3CY. They actually provide comprehensive guidance on accessibility standards and best practices to understand WCAG guidelines. Next, we have Microsoft Accessibility, who offers resources specifically for Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft products. And the guides and tutorial can really help you implement accessibility features effectively in your documents. We also have WebAIM, which is another valuable tool. They are and resource. They actually offer various articles and tools and tips for creating accessible content, including spreadsheets. So the key takeaway here is that accessibility is an ongoing process, and these resources can help you stay up to date with standards, discover new tools, and find practical solutions to accessibility challenges. By using these resources, you can continue to improve your skills, create better accessibility spreadsheets, and ensure that your work is usable by everyone. Now, that brings us to the end of our session. But before we move to the Q&A, let us watch a short demo showing some of the topics or some of the concept that we discussed today and how you can apply them in practice. So next slide, please. And Nitish, can we play the video? So you can see we have a workbook open with some random students' data. Now, the first step that we are going to take to check the accessibility is through the existing tool within Microsoft Excel, that is Accessibility Checker. For that, you need to go to the Review tab. You can also find the same option in the bottom right corner in the status bar. In this pop-up, we click on Check Accessibility, and you will be able to see the issues that the tool can identify. So in this case, we get to see two issues. One is related to the contrast and one is the text alternative. Now, we can go ahead and fix the contrast issue here in the pop-up itself. Now, regarding the alternative text, if you click on the option that it shows, in this pop-up, we have two options. Either we can give a name that we want the screen readers to identify. So in this case, I'll just add it as VCCS logo. If you want to mark it as decorative, there is also a checkbox which you can check if you don't want it to be identified by screen reader or if it does not have any information and which is completely decorative in nature. So once we add the alternative text, we save it, and then the accessibility checker issues are fixed here. That is the first step. Now, whatever the tool identified does not mean that it captured all the accessibility violations that we had discussed earlier. As you can see, the first one is the merge cells. So the first row is merged. Now we go to the Format tab within that Alignment tab and unchecked the Merge Cells option. Now, you must be wondering, if we do not merge it, how do we identify it as a title visually? So in that case, what you need to do is you need to select the same range, that is from A1 to I1 in this case, and go to the Format tab, Alignment tab again. Within that, within horizontal combo box, select the option Center Across Selection and click on OK. Once you do that, as you can see visually, it now centers the title, so it works both visually as well as it does not violate any accessibility compliance here. Now we have marked the title right. Now the next step goes as marking the table. So we have a data, we have some columns, but it is not identified or marked as table here. So what we need to do is we need to keep the focus on the first cell where the column headers start. In this case, it would be A2, that is the serial number, and we go to the Insert Table tab. Now, in this pop-up, the first thing we need to check is the table range. So if you see here, the table range it shows is only until row 3 or 4. But in our table, we have data until row 13 or 14. Why this breaks here is because we have additional rows and cells with no data. That is the reason the tool is not able to identify the flow. So here manually we need to add the range, that is from A2 until I14 for now. Maybe if we add another data there. And after that, you also have this checkbox, which is very important to check. That is, my table has headers. So it's very important to mark this checkbox as checked for the assistive technologies to identify the column headers. Once this is done, you click on OK, and the table is rightly defined, also the column headers. So this just not just only benefits people with disabilities, but also for generic users, people without disabilities. Now it's giving options to filter, to sort in the column header itself. So it makes it very user friendly. Now, after this is done, we remove the blank rows. So as we discussed earlier, that those creates a navigation issue and it also breaks the flow. So this additional row that is in between, we remove that. And we also have some blank cells for some students' exam data. It could be that they were absent or anything like the data is missing, but it's always advised in such case to add some value there. Either you can keep it as absent, or you can keep it as not applicable, or if required, just a hyphen would also do. So within a table range, it's always advised not to leave any cell or row empty. Now, once this is done, we move our focus to the percentage column, where you can see the percentage is mentioned, and it also shows the result visually. That is, whoever have passed the exam, it is marked as green. Whoever has failed, it is marked as red. Now this makes it completely visual. So what we need to do is, along with these color information, we also need to add a text. Now you can add the text pass or fail either in the same column, or you can add another column and mention it there. But it's very important to give that information in text as well. So here we are not doing it for all the students because it is just a sample demo that we are showing. Now, the next step comes is the sheet name. Now, this workbook only has one sheet, but what if there are multiple sheets and with a lot of data? So it's very important to rename the sheet exactly what the data contains. So in this case, maybe we rename it as a student report, or if you want, you can mention the class, the grade, which standard students, or whatever the specific sheet name has to be provided here. Once all this is done, we run the accessibility checker again. So we again go to the review tab and open the accessibility checker. Now, you must be wondering, when we fixed all the issues, why do we have one contrast issue again here? So if you notice, when we identify the table, the color changes to blue. And as we have some of the content in that is in green color, it fails the contrast issue. So we go ahead and fix this contrast issue here as well as the last step to fix the accessibility checker. So until and unless all the issues are fixed in the accessibility checker, we make sure that we fix all the issues until it shows good to go. So this is all for now. I hope it helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitish. Thank you, everyone. That's all for today. If we want, we can take the questions, or I can revert once the document is shared. Thank you.
I'm going to share the questions with Surbi and Nitesh, and we will share the answers with you. We'll get you the recording very quickly this week, and hopefully by the end of the week, we'll get you the answers to the questions. Surbi and Nitesh, thank you very much. Sadly, this is Surbi's last webinar of this semester. I hope we will see her in future semesters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. It was great doing these sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.